Hello and welcome to the Ghoul Guide Association podcast. This is episode part 2 of our review of the 28 Days Later franchise, where we dive into the British zombie series with a very, very special guest. In this episode, we explore the latest instalment, 28 Years Later. But if you want to catch up on our thoughts of the first 2 films, make sure you watch part 1.
As usual, there will be spoilers up ahead and a content warning for our discussion of the films. We do touch on themes of domestic violence, sexual violence, and child sexual abuse.
And again, obviously within a discourse on empire, the idea of starving a population is particularly horrifying, but that there is an idea of, oh, okay, well, actually there's a solution, which is they'll just die out, which obviously then, we ignore completely in 28 years later where they've evolved, which I think would be it is kind of a more interesting premise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should move on to that because that is by far the more interesting film.
Yes.
Okay.
I would recommend to anyone, if you want to watch it for a complete franchise kind of, completion thing, then watch it. But also if you want to just go from like 28 days later to 28 years later, that's also fine.
That's feels like the director's continuity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Danny Boyle
and
and Alex
ignore half
Garland...
of that movie because it doesn't matter. Yes, for continuity, but not even really for continuity since we then
because they had a big falling out as well, didn't they? Like, this is their first film back together in a long time.
Yeah. So this film, Danny Boyle and Alex Garland, they return. Danny Boyle was directing it. Alex Garland has written the film. Cillian Murphy is also executive producing this film. We have been promised that he will return, but he's not in this film. So if you haven't like worked out that he's not in this film, don't watch it for Cillian Murphy. But we have been told that he will be back. This film stars Aaron Taylor-Johnson, doing another accented role, which I have to say, I think his accent is better in this than Nosferatu. But whatever.
In Nosferatu, it's almost more like a vocal choice than an accent. Like, he's doing...
Yes, I thought he was doing a class thing rather than But again, as an American, it doesn't bother me, I think, as much as it bothers you, because I'm just like, oh, British, cool.
Yeah, the accent in Nosferatu is, I think, more of a class choice because it isn't really... It's almost like a transatlantic accent.
Yeah.
I think it's a genre choice too.
Yeah.
Can I be camp?
Yeah. So he's essentially playing a dad. Jodie Comer is playing his wife. Then we also have Jack O'Connell, who we will talk about at the end. But
again, don't watch it for him because he's not in a lot of the movie. But yeah.
Then we have Alfie Williams, who is playing the kind of young son, and then we also have Ray Fiennes, who again we'll get to in a bit. And essentially, the premise of this film is, so it is set 28 years after the initial outbreak in 2002, and it follows a civilized community that has been living on Lindisfarne, which is also known as the Holy Island.
The Holy Isle.
Yeah.
Which I find, I'll wait, but I find this twist so interesting.
Yes, yeah. So this is basically, they've been on this island and essentially it's one of those places where at different times of the day, you either can access it or you can't access it, depending on the water and the causeway. So at certain times, the water will be low enough that there is a causeway connecting it to mainland Britain that you can walk across. But then at other times, the tide is too high and it's not, and also because it's
quite difficult to cross.
It's quite difficult.
We call that Chekhov's causeway there.
Yeah.
It's going to come in handy later.
But they have, obviously like a fence around the island and definitely near that causeway they have like a kind of gate and a watchtower, so you can see how they've managed to survive for so long. And there is also a kind of frame narrative which we'll maybe get to at the end, that kind of the opening scene and then the final scene of the film kind of talk about. But the main film is about this community and this family. And yeah, Kathleen, do you want to kind of run us through like the plot of this film? What
Sure.
happens?
Do we have to say
stuff?
spoilers or anything?
Yeah, we'll say spoilers from this point on.
There will definitely be spoilers. Yeah.
So really, the central focus of the film is this young man named Spike, who I believe is 13 or 14, who this whole thing basically becomes this coming of age story for him. And I think that's really key for people who are coming at this as like oh, it's a zombie movie, I'm going to go see tons of zombie stuff. If you want to do that, you may want to like go see one of the Zack Snyder things instead, because I think this is true of 28 Days Later as well. It's a lot less a zombie film and more a film about people with zombies in it. And I think it's very important that this is told primarily from Spike's point of view, because I think that triggers a lot of the stylistic choices, the perception of the world. And it also, is about realizing that your family members aren't necessarily who that you thought they were. So yes, the first part of the film is him going to the mainland with his father, which is a practice that they do basically to scavenge. There's also hints that they go there to collect wood. There's kind of a system for getting on the mainland safely. His father, who's Aaron Taylor Johnson, is, I guess, a hunter. I mean, they have the bow and arrows. They go, and it's sort of supposed to be like a first blood. You kill a zombie or an infected. They never really call them zombies, but an infected, and that's supposed to be, in that context, a transition from childhood to adulthood and a rite of passage for this masculine relationship. It's a really interesting first part of the movie because, again, I do think it taps into a lot of the issues of masculinity that are sort of talked about. It front ends it as opposed to back ends it from the last movie. It's a good relationship, but there is definitely an emphasis on the father's point of view of, you toughen up. This is what it means to be masculine. This is what it means to be a warrior. And what's Spike, the kids figuring out as it goes, is that there's a difference. First off, that he makes mistakes. He's not always the big warrior. But also that when they return to the island, that, his father kind of gooses the truth, as it were. He plays up this narrative, this mythology of masculinity. And also, again, spoiler alert, he finds out in the course of returning that his father is having an affair. His mother is ill. We don't really know what she has at the beginning. We find out later. But it's an interesting illness in that she does have very aggressive outbursts. So, she'll throw things, she'll scream, she'll yell, she'll swear. Again, in the backdrop of this is a rage virus, you do sort of, I remember watching the movie the first time and being like, is there an idea that this virus has somehow mutated, that everyone's just more angry than they used to be? Because the father's kind of vicious. The mother has this, these outbursts. And again, it does blur those boundaries of what's infected and what's not, because normal people can be angry too. Normal people can have violent outbursts. That doesn't necessarily mean that they can't control themselves. In the course of that opening, element too, they also introduced these figures called the alphas. So again, we realize that the zombies haven't died. They've kind of mutated into two forms. One is sort of a very slow, crawls on the ground, eats worms, isn't super threatening, but is still pretty creepy version. The other are the fast zombies led by alphas, who are huge, aggressive, take a very long time to have to kill them a lot to kill them.
Yeah. Can I just input here? So the alphas are like quite big. And I think, thinking about like well, no, that's exactly where I'm going. No, but thinking about like the practicality of creating these zombies, I bet like the special effects and the practical people, like I think they must have made a lot of really big prosthetic penises, because obviously they're also naked, and I think that's partly why they're so terrifying in this film, and slightly different because they're so different from like a person that you would recognize, but suddenly having the rage virus. These have been zombies for like years, and I think
it made me think. So obviously, I consume a lot of the reaction content on like TikTok and stuff, and people were obviously making jokes about them having massive schlongs.
Yes.
And it made me think of that keynote that we heard a couple of years ago at the IGA by Marie Mulvey-Roberts, who's done a lot of work on the physicality of Frankenstein's monster. And she talked about the fact that like the monster is big, it's too big, and it's very phallic, and the illustrations are very phallic, and the description is very phallic, and that there's something very scary and threatening about the idea of a huge phallus, but not necessarily from a feminine perspective, but from a masculine perspective.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought it was really interesting that, you've got this narrative of masculine violence, of like, the First Blood narrative. And because Spike is young, he's too young, isn't he? Like that's part of the thing as well.
Yeah, he's younger than they usually are. And again,
and it's sort of that fallacy of manliness of like, my son will be stronger, and actually all you're doing is forcing trauma onto your child, and you're perpetuating cycles of trauma through violence. And there's obviously a real deconstruction around patriarchal violence there, as in, the almost genetic inheritance. And then when you're contrasting that with a zombie that is physically huge, but also has a huge penis that is like running full speed at you through the woods, that is a really interesting juxtaposition to the kind of like dick swinging that is going out to kill a zombie, taking your son who's not old enough, blah, 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 blah.
I've seen a lot of criticism of the film that there's not enough women characters in it, and the women in it are kind of just connected to men. But I mean, yes, that is true. There aren't a lot of women characters, although on the island, I think it's clear that the leader, the person in charge, is a woman. But I think that's partly because, exactly as you've been saying, Kathleen, like this is about masculinity, and it's about that kind of that trauma and that coming of age, and the mythos of the kind of the fighter, the warrior dad, and him trying to make his son be something that he's not. And then you do have then this kind of in your face alpha kind of horrific image of masculinity. And I just think that like this is partly what this film is about. It is about a crisis of masculinity.
And bringing it into a nation thing, because I mean I loved how they set up leaving the island for the first time, because they put against the backdrop, there are a lot of quick cuts to images of armies marching, and to the Laurence Olivier version of, I think, Henry the fifth or fourth, one of the Shakespeares. And it's overlaid with that is a recording of Rudyard Kipling's Boots. So the boots.
Oh, that recording is ooh.
And I mean, I think it's had a major comeback because it's been used now in a couple of different, I think, war movies, or at least in the trailers of them. But like it establishes very early on that it is very important for this father figure that this young male child becomes almost this figure of mythology. And that this mythology is anchored in an idea of Britain that doesn't exist anymore. And again, in the backdrop, you have the civilization on this island, which, it was surprisingly non-culty. But there are parts of it there.
I know.
Look, it's not the idea of the island being a cult isn't a central like premise of the movie, but the cult elements are super there.
Yeah, they have pictures of the Queen.
Britishness.
Well, can we talk about Lindisfarne for a second? Because the thing that really fascinated me about, like, when I read the synopsis and seeing the stuff was that they chose Lindisfarne for the setting, because it makes a lot of sense if you were looking for somewhere. But I would be going to Skye or somewhere like that. Yes, okay, then you can't get back onto the mainland and blah, 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 blah. But Lindisfarne in particular, so the Holy Isle of Lindisfarne was the first place that the Danes attacked, the first place the Vikings attacked, in like the 6th century, I think, maybe earlier. But essentially, Britain is England, all the little kingdoms are starting to flourish, and you've got this monastery on Lindisfarne that the Vikings keep pillaging. And Lindisfarne has become this really weird, interesting, semi-mythologized sort of location, because there is a small settlement there. Like, you can go there. It's not just the ruins of the abbey, but like the monk who was like the friar or whatever is a saint now. And it's just, in terms of the British history, and I know I bang on all the time about the way that Britain self-mythologizes and the revisionism of, like, the Anglo-Saxon, to choose Lindisfarne as this like starting place for the rebirth of society, so to speak, it feels so intentional because it has that connotation. And not to take it back to Mary Shelley, but I will.
Do it. Yeah, like, why not?
Yeah.
The whole point of her novel Valperga, which is a retelling of the story of Castruccio Castrucci, who is the prince from Machiavelli's The Prince, is flipping that idea. Machiavelli's The Prince became this kind of like anti-hero figure of like, oh, wow, what a badass military strategist. I want to be like him. And what Shelley does is she flips it and she's like, chivalry is a lie. If you're trained for violence, you will be violent. It's unsustainable. To be a warlord, you have to continue to make war. Like, if you seize power and you make society by war, then you have to carry on doing war. And it's almost like this idea of, they don't have to keep committing this violence. Like, they aren't at risk enough that they need to do this rite of passage where they go out and kill a like, it's almost a little bit I Am Legend, isn't it? Like, they're fine, they're chilling, leave them alone. Like, it's like this, no different than the sense of killing of any other living creature. So it's almost like that kind of returning to that narrative and picking apart that nationalist mythology right back from its earliest kind of genesis.
Yes.
Well, what I think is also really interesting about this film from that kind of that military perspective and the idea of invasion or kind of containment is that, so there is a military presence in this film, and I don't know, Lauren, if you have read up about this, but it's essentially there are
Scandinavian?
There are boats that are kind of going around the British Isles and
patrolling
patrolling and making sure that nobody leaves. And there's also, while this is going on, a kind of group of Scandinavian soldiers who end up on the mainland and
by accident.
Then
they get shipwrecked, don't they?
Yeah, they get shipwrecked. But yeah, you do have this kind of like Scandinavian military man who is just like
hi, I'm here.
So let's should we get to that? So who meets with this Scandinavian? So there's this Scandinavian soldier, and how does he kind of
Okay, so to back it up again, so there are still soldiers in there. So I'll go back. So again, this is a version of Britain, again, dreaming of itself and dreaming of a version of Britain that doesn't exist anymore and that really kind of didn't exist. Again, it's the Shakespeare version. It's the wartime propaganda version. It's the Rudyard Kipling version. And again, the inclusion of Boots, the poem, is so haunting because it is that the psychology of warfare, the psychology of masculinity and also the darker side of that. And of course, the whole thing is undermined. You've got civilized Britain, and then you go out, and it's hyper masculinity in every possible physical sense, and kind of a primal eco-Gothic. I mean, this is Britain haunted. This is Britain as a haunted house. And upon the return, again, it very much is a coming of age story, because this is, you leave, you do have this experience, and then when you return, your home is not your home anymore. It's uncanny.
So it's kind of literally unheimlich.
Yes. They have a party for Spike. His father is telling porcupines the entire time about how, but again, very much self-mythologizing, of, oh, he's the best warrior. Here, have a beer, my 14-year-old son. Someone start playing Hey Delilah really loudly. No, it is. I mean, again, it's so British. It's so very, very British. But behind it then is the mother who's so sick that she can't come. Yeah. And the father who sneaks off to have an assignation that the son then sees.
So it's kind of like Britain as a trope of itself, unable to move forward. So it's like,
yes, yeah. And,
I guess it is the keep calm and carry on posters and
yes, and all the WI stuff, and here's the flag, and here's this. Yes, and it's, again, the first movie raised this idea of futurity and what a future could be. And for the soldiers, it was very much well, we just collect women and then we just keep doing the same thing
like
we've been
base
doing.
Needs.
Yes, yeah, and it's kind of the same. I mean, it is very much a, we have a version of Britain adapted slightly, but still very much of the boots, attitude of it. But also Spike, who is having his coming of age moment where he's like, no, this isn't what I want. What I want is for my mother to be healthy. And he confronts his father. He, is like, you don't want mom to get better. You want to be with this other woman. And the father hits Spike. Spike goes up to his mother and and threatens his father with a knife, which the father then takes and then punches the wall twice. So again, this is one of those kind of the trigger warning moments for potentially if domestic violence is an issue. It doesn't necessarily get to a very extreme point. It's not an extended thing, but it does, I think, very much, again, blur that line that I think is what makes this franchise so interesting, of, there's no line between infected and non-infected. Yeah. The main character in 28 Days Later is just as violent, if not more violent, as the infected by the end of that film, to the point where that's actually like a key part, is you can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
And yeah, for Spike, it's a huge twist. It's a huge moment.
That's really interesting as well, because there's this ongoing thing with the idea of Britishness that, so there was an article that came out this weekend about the attacks on the hotels that are sheltering asylum seekers, that something like 2 in 5, maybe 4 in 5, but a significant number of the people who have been either identified or detained have previous convictions for domestic violence. And there is, every time England play, there is like an increase in domestic violence. And we have this ongoing connection between the idea of British nationalism and domestic abuse.
There's that stat, isn't it? Like when England are playing football, if England lose, domestic violence incidents go way up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if England win, they still go up.
Yeah.
Just maybe not
as
much. And it's like, what is that kind of like that masculine kind of self-mythologizing, but tied to this idea of nation. Like, I represent a man, which represents like the protector.
Yeah.
And I do think that it's really interesting, Spike's relationship with both of his parents. He is very much wanting to do, go onto the mainland for his father. And then I think he then comes back and he's a bit disappointed with his father, and you know, his father is like, here, like, have all this bacon and eat this breakfast, whereas Spike is like, I'm gonna take half of my bacon and I'm gonna leave it with my mum because I care about my mum. And he very much encompasses that kind of, I want to care for her. I don't just want to protect her, and I want to love her and help to get her better. Whereas I think he doesn't. He thinks that his father, which is true, is emotionally detached and not kind of not existing in their reality because he's so caught up in this idea of himself. Yeah.
When you build a national identity that hinges on masculinity being violent and the superiority of that masculine violence, it is unsustainable because what is the point of that violence? Like I said, why are you going out and killing these zombies? Like,
and this is also, so this is why Spike ends up back on the mainland, but without his dad. So Kathleen, do you want to pick us up with the kind of how
the end of the film,
and then well, this is not even the end, but yeah.
So that's the first part of the movie. The rest of the movie then is following. He returns to the mainland, but this time he takes his sick mother with him, bearing in mind again that she is very confused. She is sometimes prone to lashing out. So, you know, there's the element of she's not 100% stable either, but he, you know, demonstrates a great love and a great tendency to care for her. In contrast, again, to the model of masculinity that's presented to him. And I do want to say, I don't think that his father is painted as a villain. I don't think that the movie takes that easy way out. It does frame the father as being almost as much of a victim of
it's kind of perpetuated victimhood of patriarchy. Like you know, the old saying, we're all victims of patriarchy. Like we all suffer under patriarchy.
And again, as an American, it was a very interesting thing for me to watch because while as British as this is, I saw definite parallels to, you know, the nation that's not what it thinks it is and what masculinity does in that context in my country. So anyway, so throughout this, there's been this kind of figure in the background. This I saw some review call him this Kurtzian figure from Heart of Darkness, who is Ray Fiennes, who is a doctor. But he's a doctor who everyone assumes has gone insane because the only time anyone has seen this doctor, he's been surrounded by dead bodies and he seems to be doing that by choice. Like he's collecting dead bodies and no one really knows why he's doing it, but it probably can't be good.
There's a really interesting bit actually where his Spike's dad is telling him about, you know, this, so that when they're on, when the two of them are doing their kind of voyage onto the mainland to kill these infected, they see these fires in the distance, and then his dad says, don't go there. And you very much get the sense that his dad is terrified. And he tells this story, I think, where he had seen these fires years ago and he's never investigated them. And there is this idea that Spike is like, but why, you know, he asked someone else and that's how he finds out about the doctor. And he's like, why have you not been curious? And why have you not wanted to go further to find out what this is, you know? And I think that's also part of this whole, you know, it's questioning masculinity in that, like, he seems, you know, he wants to project this image of I'm fearless, but actually he is himself quite afraid. Whereas Spike, Spike is like, do you know what? If there's a doctor, my mum's sick, so I'm going to take her and I'm going to find her, and I will find a way.
And I think I'll come back to that, but I do think it's an interesting thing that it says about our relationship with death and grief, that the father doesn't want to, he's like, this guy's surrounded by death. I don't want to go there. Now, again, that's not an unreasonable expectation or impulse, but anyway, so he says, okay, I'm going to take her. He's a doctor from the old world. You know, he knows old medicine. So I will take my mother to this mad priest guy in the middle of nowhere. In the course of that, yes, he runs across a soldier, Eric, who is Swedish?
Yeah,
Nordic
I think so.
something. Yes.
From the Scandinavian Nordic part of the world.
Yes. Who is the only one who has survived of his entire group. And again, it's a classic 28 Days Later joke, basically, that the soldiers are not that good at their jobs. Like soldiers are very bad at surviving in general in these films. And they pair off. And again, that's one of those things that has some of those very funny moments. But you do have a soldier who's very young and who is in a way a child himself, and who has joined the military kind of with this idea of this will give my life meaning, this will give my life purpose. And of course, now he's on this island, he can't leave, so his life is essentially over. And he knows about cell phones and, cars and all these things that Spike doesn't know. So it's a very interesting kind of back and forth between them of here's a post-apocalypse kid meeting someone from the normal kind of real world. So they go along. It's this ongoing thing, and the relationship between the mother and Spike is in itself extraordinarily complex, and I don't have time to get into it, but it's lovely. It's this evolving thing. The relationship between Spike and the soldier is this lovely evolving thing. It all comes to a head when they find, and this is really interesting, a pregnant infected who is giving birth. There's a very interesting key moment where Spike's mother essentially helps this infected give birth. And again, it's really blurring those lines between who's infected and who's not. And the infected does give birth. And I think, and Mary, you can maybe help me on this. I think the implication is that the baby is also from an alpha, like that might be there might be a kind of infected family dynamic going on, that because the alpha pursues then the baby. But the baby itself, once born, is not infected. So there's a very interesting, again, maybe religious, maybe whatever kind of undercurrent thing here of an infected gives birth, the baby is not infected. Maybe it's an asymptomatic carrier, maybe it's not, but it seems to be fine. In the course of that, they lose Eric, but they run into Dr. Kelson, who's played by Ray Fiennes, who does something else interesting, which is he's able to disable the alphas without killing them. So again, we're playing with this idea of masculinity and what it can do. For Spike's father, it's you kill them, you have to shoot them multiple times. They're these huge monsters, they're these huge threats. But there is a scene where Ray Fiennes is basically dancing around this alpha that's twice his size, having been able to basically temporarily incapacitate him with drugs. And then he just sort of, it's like catch and release. He just sort of lets him go then. So again, that there's an alternative. And what Kelson's kind of whole premise is, well, two premises. First off, there's no difference between infected and not infected. But also that what he's been doing then with the dead bodies has been building the bone tower. And this tribute to Memento Mori, where he has been basically denuding all the bodies, and with the skeletons, he's been building these structures, which he acknowledges will not last forever. They're not meant to be these permanent, signs. He is very aware of the temporariness of what he's doing and life and humanity and all that kind of stuff, but that it is what he's been doing all this time has not been some weird, well, I mean, it's a bit odd, but he's not been doing something deviant.
Yeah, it's not sinister. It's
I found
meaningful.
I found this part of the film so interesting and also so moving. And so
I never thought I'd be crying watching a kid holding a skull, but I was.
Yeah. I mean, as all three of us are gothicists, and if I were ever to do a talk or kind of teach about Memento Mori, I would want to kind of get Ray Fiennes kind of talk about this and just be like, this is Memento Mori. But I think what's really important, and this is what we also try and say when we talk about memento mori and the Gothic is that, yes, memento mori means like remember you will die, but then he also introduces memento amor, which is remember to love. And I think you get that idea that the bone temple is a kind of monument to life, even though it's made out of dead bones and things. And it's a remembrance, and it's also a celebration of the people and the person that lived. And it really made me think of pandemics are, we don't have time to go too much into pandemics, but like we have all recently, we are still currently living through a pandemic. And I think there is this kind of like a mass forgetting that's happening where we're just kind of forgetting about all of these people that died. And I think, it made me think of in London, the COVID wall, the COVID monument, where they drew a little heart for every person that died of COVID. And then people could go and like write the name of their loved ones. And I don't know if that wall is still there. I think it is, but like,
I think it's
that, it's that idea that obviously that monument is not going to last forever, but it is, I think these things important. Are necessary and important.
Yes.
I was literally just writing something about the way that we memorialize war. So I just recently was at a Jane Austen conference, and I gave a paper about Jane Austen War. I talked a little bit about Mary Shelley at the end of it, because I see them as two they're contemporaries for one thing. But they're both post-war writers. They're both, Austen less so, because she doesn't sadly live long enough. But there's this kind of like criticism in the 1820s and 1830s of the way that the Napoleonic War is being remembered. It's like, Europe's absolutely decimated by it. There's whole plains and fields and everything that are destroyed. People whose lives are ripped apart, people, who are displaced, people who have lost their lives. And the memorializations start to come in and start to happen. And it's almost all, stories of heroes. You've got like the Captain Marryat style stories, and it's all very glorifying the soldiers who won the war, not memorializing the people who lost their lives or were destroyed by the war. And it's like Shelley really kind of like pushes back against it and is like, hold on a second, why is this happening? And I think it's really interesting, again, in the Britishness of this film, we are a nation obsessed with war memorials. We have war memorials everywhere. Up until the Second World War, a lot of our war memorials are actually statues of heroes. We've got Nelson's Column, we've got, stuff in Trafalgar Square. We have all of these statues of these men who were really perpetuators of colonial violence, and in some cases, literally colonial violence. We have statues of slave traders. We're a nation that's obsessed with this kind of like memorialization, but we get very, very uncomfortable when those memorials are of things that we don't want to remember.
Yeah.
And
this is a very democratic memorial in the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, there's kind of nothing more democratic than just a skull, because it looks like every other skull.
Exactly. And even when you think about something like the grave of the fallen soldier, like the unnamed soldier, it's still very patriotic and very nationalistic, and it's twisting that kind of like, anti-war narrative of, First and Second World War poets who were like, hold on a second, this is not glorious. Like, it is not glorious to die in service of your country. And, I don't, as a war scholar, I really don't like the Remembrance Day parades. They make me really angry. I think they're all about national, glory and patriotism, and it's all about pomp and splendor, and it's not about the horror of war and the tragedy and the loss and the fact that never again should be never again. And I feel like having the Aaron Taylor-Johnson character being like, oh no, scary, creepy, bad.
Yes.
It's
definitely speaking to, I think, a social projection of a version of death, which again is, and I can understand why people who came to this movie being like, oh cool, I get to watch zombies being killed in 2 hours. And again, I think this feeds into the ending as well. But really at the central is like, no, you should remember, but you should also remember for not a reason of this is a national project, but you should remember because the love was there.
Mm-hmm.
His mother, it's revealed, has terminal cancer, we believe, because there's no kind of other option. This is Spike having to face the fact that people he loves will die. And that's never really considered when he goes off with his father. I mean, for all that they're surrounded by death and are on basically a killing project, this is at its core that universal confrontation of a child and death between them. But it's so redemptive, and it's done in such a gentle, I think, considerate way of, even in the face of mass destruction, even in the apocalypse, even in death, we're all kind of the same. And what makes it different is that the love was there, that the respect is there, that you're part of this, a tower, but you're with all these other people, and even that's not going to last forever. And Ray Fiennes was I think brilliant, and Alfie Williams, is that the actors, was excellent. That's such a tough thing to film, I think, and it was really beautifully done.
It was so beautiful. I will say, Lauren, I know you watch clips and stuff, but I think you would be able to watch clips of that bit. I think it would be fine.
It's
just because we are going quite long. I think I am just going to kind of, let's just kind of
get to the end.
Quickly sum up, and then, because I do want to talk about the ending. But I think this is
Spike makes that commitment then as part of his journey to he takes the baby back to the island,
and his mum has chosen to die. So Ray Fiennes helps her to die in a kind of pain-free way, and then it's quite a cathartic moment where he does his skull treatment, and Spike is able to place his mum's skull at the top of the bone tower, and then Spike leaves with the baby, and he goes back to the island, and then
Can I just say, I saw this spoiler about 2 days after this film came out.
We're not there yet.
Okay,
don't worry.
Right.
Kathleen, do you want to tell us? So Spike takes his baby.
So Spike takes the baby. He leaves the baby with the again, understanding that the baby will be raised by his father and the community. So again, not that they are being portrayed as villains, but Spike also leaves a letter saying he names the baby after his mother, and he says, I may come back, I will come back, but not until I'm ready. So again, he returns to the mainland, and it is this, again, a continuation of a coming-of-age journey. It's very interesting, too, because that scene where he leaves is when we get, music-wise, pretty much the main theme from 28 Days Later, when the Cillian Murphy character is finding out. When the Cillian Murphy character is isolated and alone, and he's then confronted with the zombies, that's the music that's kind of repeating. So again, we're brought back to that element of the initial movie. He's cornered by zombies, and that's when this new character comes in. Sir Jimmy Crystal is how he's credited. So again, another religious reference here, and he's played by Jack O'Connell. And this is one where me watching it as American probably had a different reaction. I will say this, and then I'll kick it over to you. I know that there was a lot of criticism of this. It was a shock ending. It was completely tonally different. I don't understand it. I think it was jarring. That being said, I don't think it was quite the totally out of left field thing that I think a lot of people watching it believe it was. I actually think it is consistent with the coming of age story. I think it's consistent with the genre. But I wanted to get your kind of initial reactions to who you thought of when you saw this. I didn't think of that person, and I have a very different perception of that.
Okay, so I saw this spoiler about 2 days after this film came out. Mary had already said when we'd recorded the last horror episode that she was going to go see, like, she was like, oh, it's coming out this week. Like, I'm going to go see it. And then she, like, 2 days after we recorded, I see this spoiler and I text Mary and I say, oh my fucking God, have you seen it yet? Because I've just seen a spoiler for the ending and, like, what the fuck? But then also I remembered, and then I started seeing the American responses trickle in, and it reminded me of an infamous time where we were playing Cards Against Humanity and Kathleen played what she thought was a throwaway card because she didn't know who this person was.
So before we get to that really funny anecdote, let's just explain, because I think there might be people watching who haven't seen the ending.
Yeah.
So as I said when we started talking about this film, there is a kind of a beginning bit,
a frame
narrative that is essentially in that kind of original time frame of the initial outbreak. So kind of contemporaneous to the Cillian Murphy kind of storyline. It's in the Scottish Highlands. There is a kid called Jimmy Crystal, and his dad is a preacher, and there's all these infected, and then essentially his dad, and this is why I think this is so fascinating for me, especially in terms of what we wrote about in the afterword, is his dad is a preacher, and he essentially welcomes the infected. He wants them to come in.
It's almost a prequel to what we see in 28 Days Later of, hey, here's the priest getting infected. But again, in a way that's like, oh yeah, let it happen, God's will.
And so
let
Jimmy,
me give you a cross. Jimmy
and a load of other kids had been kind of like, families have been trying to protect them in a house. They were watching Teletubbies, which is if you don't know, it's like a British kids TV show that I think got banned in one country for being too queer.
It's also very popular in America.
Yeah.
One of the characters has a handbag and everyone was like, oh my God, he's gay. It's an alien.
They get overrun. Jimmy runs to the church where he sees his dad, and his dad is like, not protecting him. He's like, let me get infected. Jimmy manages to hide, and his dad obviously gets bitten, and then that's the kind of end of it. And you're kind of like thinking, who is Jimmy? And I think there is
and we see hints of it throughout the film. Then it's written on the side of walls.
You see all of this Jimmy stuff, Jimmy everywhere, and there's even
most probably tellingly, we see someone who's hanging upside down, again in a very upsetting image. Someone who's hanging upside down, who's become infected and has a bag over their head. And Jimmy has been carved into their body. So again, a very disturbing image, but he sort of haunts this entire narrative before he comes in at the end.
Yeah. So that is the kind of like the beginning bit. And then, as you say, like he is still there throughout the entire narrative, and you see all this graffiti and that horrific kind of human carving and stuff.
Yes.
But then at the end of the film, Spike is kind of being attacked by the infected. And then this group of people wearing jumpsuits,
specifically shell suits,
blonde wigs, all this oversized gold jewelry, and you're kind of like, what the hell is happening? It's like this weird,
very bouncy pop music kind of comes on, and it's again, I will make the argument that this is still in keeping with the zombie genre. It's a different kind. I mean, 28 Days Later plays it very straight and deadpan. But there is, the Zack Snyder zombies, and even like Cockneys versus Zombies, and a version of zombie killing that is that kind of Kill Bill, very, very hyper stylized fighting. So I'm like, okay, we slipped into a different zombie movie, but we're still in a zombie movie.
Yeah,
and a zombie movie a teenager would like, I think.
Yeah,
so again,
essentially
not out of character.
This weird cult-like group save Spike, and then that's the end of the film. And I think for a lot of Americans, obviously
that context is not
there. You have a little bit of context. You might be thinking, "Oh, this is weird." Anyone British watching it would be like,
That's Jimmy Savile.
That's Jimmy Savile." And okay,
which,
Lauren,
at the time, I was like,
so,
I feel like this is a reference that even I, as
so Jimmy Savile, and the specific thing about the film is that the outbreak happens in 2002, which means Project Yewtree never happens. Jimmy Savile is never exposed
what is
as being...
What is Project... You need to explain who Jimmy Savile is.
Well, I know. I was getting that.
Yeah, okay.
So we never would have discovered that Jimmy Savile, who was an 80s British giant of television and culture, massive part of the BBC, mostly did children's TV programs, famously one called Jim Will Fix It.
Top of the Pops.
Top of the Pops.
Yep.
Would wear these yellow...
Besties with the royal family.
Yellow glasses, white hair, did all this children's philanthropy, which essentially gave him access to vulnerable children who he, on a mass scale, molested, raped, and abused. This didn't come out until the late 2000s. And alongside it, then came an investigation called Project U-Tree, which revealed a mass, essentially child trafficking ring across the United Kingdom, enabled and covered up by the BBC, essentially. So Jimmy Savile went from being an icon of Britishness to one of our most shameful points in recent history. Now, the reason that I straight away was like, no wonder these Americans are not getting this, is because in 2018, during a game of Cards Against Humanity, I cannot remember what the question was,
no,
Kathleen played
Jimmy Savile.
Kathleen played the Jimmy Savile card, and we were horrified. Yes. We were like, Kathleen, I can't believe, like, that's not. We were like, that's not funny. The card, I think, had something to do with children, and we were like, that's not funny. What the fuck?
Yeah.
And Kathleen
I was like, I don't know who this is. I was just trying to get rid of the card because I didn't know who it was.
And we had to explain to you who Jimmy Savile was. And
that pretty much killed that game, I would just say.
And a very funny moment in our history, but also was a real eye-opener moment for me of this is a cultural moment, a very uncomfortable, unpleasant cultural moment that is very specific to Britain. So when all of the responses were coming out, there was this very clear divide between British viewers and American viewers.
Horrified.
British viewers were like, oh my fucking God. And what a lot of British viewers were saying was, this really hammers home the idea that this film is destabilizing Britishness, that if Project U-Tree had never happened and if this had all never happened, we would never have known this. And if you are a young boy like Spike growing up in the early 2000s, you potentially, not Spike, Jimmy, and you're called Jimmy, you potentially would have someone like Jimmy Savile. And the whole thing was, Jim will fix it. You've got a problem, Jim will fix it. Like, you wrote in, Jimmy Savile came and fixed it for you. I think the implication as well is that their dad is quite a fundamentalist, you know, that they have to wait until he goes to work to be able to watch the Teletubbies. So someone like Jimmy Savile, who was a TV icon, would be this heroic symbol. So it's horrifying and grotesque to us as a viewer in 2025 with the knowledge that we have.
Yeah.
But no one in the world of 28 Days Later knows that that's like, well, not no one, but like, you know, that's never been that great reckoning.
And
that
so,
it is tied closely to the religion element as well.
Yeah.
I've got some quotes that I found from Danny Boyle and Alex Garland kind of talking about their inclusion of this character and why. So I'll just read them, and I think it gives it a little bit more context, I think. So Danny Boyle said, he's as much to do with pop culture as he is to do with sportswear, to do with cricket, to do with the honours system. It's all kind of twisting.
Because he was a sir.
And this partial remembrance, clinging on to things and then recreating them as an image for followers. And then Alex Garland has said about Jimmy, he's a kaleidoscope, isn't he? A sort of trippy, fucked up kaleidoscope. So I think there is a reason as to why they have chosen such a horrific, monstrous image that also, for someone who doesn't have that context, also just looks really fucking weird. Like, what is this? Well, why are they all wearing these? Yeah.
Without the context, and again, I was vaguely aware that there might have been context that I just wasn't getting, but even just reading it without that, I was like, well, I know the tracksuits are a bit British. What I had to lean into then was the cult elements and the religious elements. So I was like, Everyone has the same hair, creepy. Everyone has the same clothes, creepy. Everyone's super coordinated in their violence, very creepy. I can see them dangling the person upside down again, which I hate. We have the cross that was given to him in the first scene, but now it's inverted, so obviously there. And I don't think they say his last name in the film, but when I looked it up later, that it was a JC reference, and I'm like, okay, I can see why this is going to be central to future films, and I can again, what an interesting thing they're doing with the religion. We now have the Antichrist. And again, I think it's very interesting in keeping with this is going to be incorporated into Spike's story, because now he's a teenager away from home. The Unheimlich home, the uncanny home. Where do you go from there? You join a cult. Obviously, you join a cult, or you have to engage with that.
Well, it's kind of like that thing about cult hopping as well. Like the Lindisfarne community is cult-ish, but not actively a cult. It's cult-ish because it's it's essentially a survivalist group. So it's it's culty in the way that any society that is closed off is going to be culty. But this is like an active cult, like a conscious participation in cultishness. And I thought it was really interesting that they picked Jimmy Savile, not only because it's such a recognizable, and for a British viewer, such a point of horror, like, and
institutionalized.
Yeah. Like, we joke about like, Mr. Blobby, for example. Do you know what Mr. Blobby is, Kathleen? Did we show you that? Yes. So Mr. Blobby was this pink and yellow polka dot monster. And actually what Mr. Blobby was a nighttime TV show trope that allowed them to run around after mostly female celebrities and touch them inappropriately. But it's one of those points of like British culture from the 80s and the 90s that when you look back, you're like, that's horribly uncomfortable, like horribly sexist, horribly inappropriate. But we don't want to think about it. But it's an institution of Britishness. Yes. And in the same way of having a picture of the Queen on the wall, like Jimmy Savile was, even though he, everyone jokes now, like our generation is like, what the hell? He looks like a pedophile. Like he looks like a creep. Like, why would you trust that guy? But then why anything, like so much of what we consider to be British and British culture has these very uncomfortable, very unpleasant undertones of sexual violence, racial violence, physical violence, colonial violence, whatever it might be. And I think
definitely covering it too, of we're going to kill these people. I know we just had this long conversation about how there's really no difference between us and the infected, but we're going to do it. We're going to murder these people in really like hilariously cartoonish, grotesque ways, cartoon violence. And it's fine because there's bouncy music behind it. And
it's that kind of like, it kind of reminds me, it's got a completely different vibe, but it reminds me a lot from interviews that the creators of The Last of Us gave when the second game came out. And they said, so spoiler alert for The Last of Us, there's a fight at the end that's very slow, very drawn out, very unpleasant to play. And the whole point of it is to try and undo the response that some gamers had to the first game, which was, oh, great, I get to kill zombies. This is great. It's great. It's so violent. And what they tried to do with the second game was to force you to confront what violence really is, and that violence is actually horrifying, is actually, devastating, unraveling, all of these things. And it kind of feels to me like choosing a figure like Jimmy Savile is doing the same thing. It's making sure at the end of that film that you can't ignore all of the deconstruction that's been going on throughout the rest of the film, that you are going to be forced with the reality that in the same way that there's a Spike, there's going to be a Jimmy. Like that somewhere within that society, there's going to be those people.
And again, the movie does such a good job of speaking to the humanity of all of this, that I think when it, and there's joy in it, there's beauty, and the world is this beautiful thing. And then even if you didn't necessarily understand, I was uncomfortable watching it. And I didn't even really know why.
See, that's interesting, because that's what I wanted to ask you.
I was also like still reeling. I'm like, I have felt every human emotion in the last half hour watching, Spike go through this amazing emotional grief journey with his mom and really deconstruct what grief is and put it in the context of the end of Empire and the end of the world. And then the pop bouncy violence was jarring, and I feel like I was not allowed to just sort of sink into this is zombie, so who cares? Or, oh, this is funny, or, oh, this is like, all the kind of Shaun of the Dead, like, oh, who cares?
Yeah.
It's that I wasn't allowed to sink back into that cartoon violence, which I think was, again, it's a testament to very good directing and writing that you were so emotionally devastated by the time you got to that point that by the end you were like, don't do that. Like,
no.
Right.
How did it make that zombie? How did it make?
Don't kill that zombie.
Yeah. How did it make you feel as a British viewer, Mary?
So it's such a kind of tonally a 180. Like I cried in the cinema at the kind of the bone tower, and then he Spike kind of like embarks on a new journey. You're like, okay, cool, I'm with you. And then he gets cornered, and you're like, oh no, this can't be the end of it. And then you're like, what?
You're still listening to that music.
What is happening? Yeah, like what is happening? And like genuinely, my jaw was open, and I was looking. So I went with Craig, and I was just like, what is happening right now? It was. I think because of that tonal shift as well, it makes it. It would be a shocking scene anyway, but I think you need that kind of. It's almost like a catharsis of a way for Spike, and then you're like, what? So yeah, that's how I felt it.
Yeah,
it's not often that I have such a kind of like physical reaction to films.
I mean,
but that was like,
I was in shock when I found it out. Like, I was like, surely not. Like, what? And that's why I messaged you and was like, we need to talk about this.
And I think it's good too, because again, when I watched that again, without the context, I'm like, oh wait, Spike's still a child. I think it's easy to watch a coming of age story, and by the end of it, you're like, well, Spike, it's easy to. I mean, we self-mythologize, we mythologize. I was building up the mythology of Spike. Okay, well now he's going to go into the world and be a man and be this great figure and everything, and to have that come in was again to sort of be confronted with the, oh no, he's very young, and there are other things out there. And the scariest part of the kind of first movie was the isolation and also the cult, the cult of the soldiers, but also the cult. And that both of those elements are there. I mean, that's the same thing. It's the thing that's scary about The Walking Dead, or really any apocalypse movie. I wouldn't even say it's relegated to zombies as what humans do after.
Yeah.
And then just to remember, oh wait, no, this character is vulnerable. I shouldn't fall back into that trap of the same trap that they all had of mythologizing someone who is still very much vulnerable.
I think that's such a great point. And I think because you have that bit at the beginning where you see Jimmy as a child, and then you see him again and he's grown up now, but you have Spike as a child, and it's almost like, yeah, he's fucked up. He's got all this trauma. Like, he literally saw like his dad die
willingly
above him. Yeah. And then who knows what else he's done.
In a weird religious way, which makes it 1,000 times worse.
Yeah. Again, so this episode is going to be very long. I do just quickly want to touch on like where this is going next. And I think, Kathleen, when the next film comes out, maybe we, like, if you would like, maybe we could have you back to kind of talk about that.
Definitely should.
Because the next film, they've already announced, it will be called 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. It's due to be released in 2026. And this is written by Alex Garland again. But this one will be directed by Nia DaCosta, who you may know from Candyman, the 2021 sequel recall, and also The Marvels, which came out in 2023. Yes.
Which was foiled by the studio, but is has the heart of a great film.
I think it's one of the biggest kind of monetary releases for a Black female director. So, you know, I think
I thought it was a really good film.
But she's directing it, and I think she's very accomplished and she's great. So that would be really good. This film was shot back to back with the one that just came out. So it's already been, I think, largely filmed. And it's going to go back to, the Sir Jimmy Crystal and explore his cult. And then there is also a third film in this kind of recent kind of return to this, which will see Danny Boyle return as director. Garland has said that the Bone Temple, and then also the planned third film, which I don't think it's yet been greenlit, but they're hoping that it will be, focuses on how different groups try to construct a future based on what they do and don't remember about the past. So I think everything that we've been talking about here in terms of futurity, nation building, self-mythologizing and cults, and that specific Britishness and that British horror, I think it's going to continue to be really key, as well as the idea of the religious narratives as well.
Yeah.
And Garland's also said, like, the thing about looking back is how selective memory is. It cherry picks and it has amnesia, and crucially, it also misremembers. We are living in a time right now which is absolutely dominated by a misremembered past. And I just thought those things were really interesting to kind of think about this film and the next films, but also just our current kind of moment. So that's next. Again, like Kathleen, hopefully we would love to have you back to talk about that film when it comes out.
Love to come back.
Any final thoughts or any thoughts on?
I feel like I do know this, but because you've both said you like Craig, did you enjoy this film? Would you recommend this film?
Oh, very much.
Yeah,
very much.
Yeah.
Yes. Very, very much.
Amazing.
Not what I expected. I think a lot of people walked into it kind of expecting a redo of 28 Days Later. And I have to hand it to the filmmaker and the director in that they took it in a completely different direction. They shot it differently. It was stylized in a different way. And it focused on different things. I think all the things I did love about the first one were reimagined in such incredible ways. And again, I didn't expect to cry in a zombie movie, but I did. I think it's very consistent with the, this is a movie about people with zombies in it. But it's still an excellent horror film. And, the scares when they're there are scary, and the ick when it's there is icky. And, but it gave me so much to think about. And usually that's my, for a horror movie. So.
Oh, that is a lovely point to end on. That was a really, really succinct and beautiful roundup. Thank you, Kathleen. Well, if you have any movies, obviously on the horizon that you would like us to review, or anything that you want us to watch, let us know. Mary will be back shortly with the July. I briefly forgot what month we were in there.
Yeah.
The July So You Don't Like Horror Roundup. I've got another deep dive on the way, so we will be back in your ears and potentially on your eyes. In your eyes? I don't know, that didn't really work, but very soon the association will reconvene. Thank you so much to our special guest for this episode, Dr. Kathleen Hudson. You can find her on BLUESKY, you can find her books, and in the meantime, as ever, till we see you again, stay safe and stay spooky.
Stay safe and stay spooky.